The leadership of Jehovah's Witnesses did something absolutely shocking recently. They have removed one of the most controversial things in their entire doctrine, disfellowshipping. Well, I say they removed it, but they didn't actually remove it. They just changed it to being removed, not disfellowship. It's a little bit confusing, but I decided I wanted to take a look at the history of Jehovah's Witnesses and their relationship to shunning, excommunication, removing, disfellowshipping, whatever you want to call it. And to do that, we got to start at the very beginning. So let's do this. What would eventually become the Jehovah's Witness organization that we know today started in the late 1800s. Now, this was a fascinating time in American history, mostly because there was this monumental shift in religious identity in America, known as the Second Great Awakening. The Second Great Awakening was basically a transition out of the more Calvinist way of looking at the world, which focused on the depravity of man and how sinful everyone was, to sort of this more evangelical congregationalist, and eventually would become the Baptist and the Protestant. This eventually led to something of a more upbeat style of religion that really focused on the positive aspects of religious movements. And because of the separation of church and state, it allowed a lot of people, specifically if you had a pulse, a Bible, and a calculator, or could do some basic math, you could start your own religion using this thing called numerology. So what people were doing is they were diving into the Bible and looking for symbols and hidden clues. If you've ever seen the Da Vinci Code, it's something sort of like that. So as everyone's Nicolas Cage going on this national treasure adventure, a lot of different religions started to pop up. And there was one man that would be quintessential in what is now the Jehovah's Witnesses, and his name was Charles Taze Russell. Early on, Charles Taze Russell became disillusioned with not only religion, but at the thought of a loving God actually existing due to circumstances surrounding the death of one of his parents. Now, later on in life, through happenstance and as the lore goes, he was walking by and heard a preacher that was really using the Bible. Now, this chance encounter just happened to be the kerosene that would ignite the flame that lived deep inside of his soul to being a religious person. And boy howdy, would he just keep pouring on that kerosene, and that flame just kept burning bright. So what he eventually did was get together with some like-minded people, and they would go through the scriptures and try and figure out, hey, do the actual scriptures in the Bible match and are consistent with these religious traditions that we've been taught for years? This is how the Jehovah's Witnesses explain that process.
They would take a subject, they would get a Bible concordance, they would look up every single scripture that had a bearing on the subject, and then they would write down their conclusions. And then they would say, all right, this is what the Bible teaches. We are going to believe that.
Now, if you're wondering to yourself what any of this has to do with shunning or excommunication or disfellowshipping, sit there, hold tight, I got you. This is a quintessential piece of the puzzle and how the Jehovah's Witnesses sort of broke off from the normal Christianity, and they looked at the Bible and were carving their own path. It was predicated on this idea that asking questions was a good thing. So defying the establishment was a positive thing and a way to get closer to God. And as a representation of that movement, inherently, they were open to people questioning even the things that they were saying. Here's an example from an 1882 Watchtower, December 1st, where Charles Taze Russell wrote, "We are not of those who disfellowship Christian brethren on account of some differences of opinion. But when it comes to the point of denying the very foundation of all Christianity, we must speak out and withstand all such to the face, for they have become the enemies of the cross of Christ." So here's a perfect example. We do not disfellowship someone. We do not stop talking to someone or shun someone just because they have a difference of opinion. And that makes perfect sense considering where they came from. An expression I like to say is, where you stand on matters often depends upon where you sit in life. Sometimes the position you find yourself sort of shapes how you think about things. And so for them to think, oh, well, now we have the real truth, and anyone that disagrees with us, we're going to cast them out, it would look super hypocritical from the context of, well, isn't that how you started this religion in the very first place?
The religious thinking of these men had undergone remarkable change.
Christ's return will mean great blessings.
Their study of the Bible led them to major conclusions that challenged the prevailing religious views of the day.
Now, after the original founder, Charles Taze Russell, had died, yes, he had some embarrassing predictions about the end of the world that, obviously, when someone predicts the end of the world, they've been wrong 100% of the time. Now, their new leader, Rutherford, had a very similar position because there was an establishment that wanted to keep with Pastor Russell's teachings, but he wanted to take the organization or the Bible students in a sort of different direction.
Brother Rutherford, he was an entirely different personality, brusque in manner, and he didn't fear to tread on anyone's toes. I think this had a tremendous test on the brothers because they were really worshipping the creature more than the creator.
And there was some infighting. People branched off. There are still people that follow the teachings of Russell to this day. But as far as the organization goes, it shifted over to the control of this guy, Rutherford. And again, when you branch off and start making some changes or looking at things different, you are going to be viewed as a hypocrite. If now you're saying, hey, and if you disagree with me, you're going to be kicked out. And this is how the second epoch of Watchtower got started. It branched off from something else. Now, what did they have to say about excommunication and disfellowshipping? Well, it wasn't that we just shouldn't do it, but they kind of went in on the other churches that would use such practices, calling them weapons. Take a look at some of these quotes. This is from a Watchtower in 1920, April 1st, and it says, applying the same rule to the several ecclesiases, okay, I can't speak English, composing the entire body, suppose one ecclesia is composed of 100 persons, 60 of whom say, we are not in harmony with the society and its work. Therefore, we will elect as our elders and servants those among the majority who hold our views. Certainly, no fair-minded person would deny that they had the privilege thus to do. If they felt the Lord would be better pleased with them and their action to follow that course, then it is their privilege to take it. On the other hand, suppose the 60 or even a larger majority said, we are in full harmony with the society and the work it is trying to do. We believe it has a commission from the Lord and that it is in accordance with his will that we should work harmoniously in the proclamation of his message. Therefore, we will elect as our elders and servants only those who hold similar views and who will work in harmony with us. Would not that privilege be theirs? Surely, no one can deny that fact. But what about the minority? Should they be disfellowshipped? Certainly not. They should be treated kindly, treated as brethren, in harmony with the scriptural admonition that we should do good unto all, especially those of the household of faith. Should they be greeted as brethren? To be sure. Why should anyone be treated unkindly because he could not see just as we see? Let each one exercise the spirit of love, the spirit of Christ toward the brethren, because if any man have not the spirit of Christ, he is none of his. So even on the base level of, hey, we have a congregation and they have different views, it would be their privilege and their right to elect the elders or servants that hold the same view as the majority to just carry on if they think that will get them closer to Jesus. And they wouldn't treat them, or if the people in the minority, they wouldn't treat them like outsiders. They wouldn't cast them off. They wouldn't stop talking to them. So we see a very lenient structure within the organization going all the way back to 1920s. Now, the second leader of the Watchtower organization, he also had some egg on his face with some failed predictions. Despite having all this egg on his face, he really wanted to make his mark on this community in America of religious people, and so he did so by attacking the established religious congregations and organizations that were around him. He was kind of famous for being none too nice, getting into debates, and this, that, and the third.
Religion brought about the destruction of the world by the flood. Religion caused the confusion of languages. Religion has drenched the earth with human blood. Religion brought the downfall of the nation of Israel. Religion and its wicked agents under the leadership of demons is destroying the people and will shortly bring down the wrath of Almighty God upon the whole world in the greatest tribulation ever known.
Thank God we no longer must reject those signs at the point of old-time scare weapon of excommunication. In his book Deliverance in 1926, he said this: "Delegates of churches assembled to discuss points of faith or suppress nascent heresies. The diocesan system was developed, the ecclesiastical centralization commenced, deacons began to be reckoned among the higher clergy. The weapons of excommunication were forged. The church was thus laying the foundation of its future polity and power." Now, in my personal favorite quote, this one comes from 1930, October 1st. "It boasts a membership of over 500 million persons. Its members are in bondage to creeds, customs, rites, and ceremonies. They dare not disown these or criticize or expose them. To do so would bring down on their heads taunts, reproaches, disfellowship, and persecution." So, the second leader of Jehovah's Witnesses was carrying on this tradition of why in tarnation would we ever use excommunication? It is so obviously and clearly a weapon used to keep people in bondage, in prison, a mental prison, for fear of the ramifications of criticizing the organization. So they really saw it for exactly what it was.
That is one big pile of shit.
Now, Rutherford, he was not someone that was shouting into the empty void with no one to listen to. He is not some angry Karen threatening some minimum wage worker with a bad negative Yelp review because they didn't get enough chicken on their Chipotle bowl. No, he was actually getting attention for the incendiary things that he was saying. So much so that there was a Protestant clergy that were distributing this tract around called 3 Blasphemies of the International Bible Students. Now, the International Bible Students, that's what they were called then, but that is Watchtower, Jehovah's Witnesses. It's all the exact same thing. And this is what they had to say about the distribution of this tract, talking about the blasphemies of the International Bible Students. It comes from a golden age in 1931, September 16th. "The clergy are distributing a small tract entitled The 3 Blasphemies of the International Bible Students, and the priests in various parishes are making desperate efforts to stop the message from going to the people by threatening them with excommunication and other evils if they read our books or even look at them." Now, if you've never been a Jehovah's Witness or have no context for why this is going to be shocking to a lot of people, that's because if you grew up anytime after 1952, you are going to be familiar with the Jehovah's Witnesses doing this regularly, scaring people into staying in their own religion. Now, I casually said 1952 because that is where we're going to jump to next, where we have the third iteration and progression of the Jehovah's Witness movement. Now we move into the next epoch of Jehovah's Witness leadership, the man that makes up the triumvirate of Watchtower leaders, and that is Nathan Noor.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
Now, for anyone curious or that doesn't know, previously, before the governing body had authority over the Watchtower organization, there was a president of that organization, and he basically had complete power over it. So The three characters we've talked about are the three ones that had sole control, and they all share a few things in common. First, there is predictions around a particular year that Armageddon will take place. Second, they are trying to move the organization, the Watchtower, in a slightly different direction than their predecessor. And lastly, they all genuinely thought, I believe, I can't live inside their heads, but I believe they all genuinely thought that God was using them, that they were in this special privileged position to be sort of the dummy for God or for Jesus. I mean, Nathan Noor, he was born in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, for Christ's sake. Like, why did I say Pennsylvania? It's like my tongue just went numb. Anyway, let's talk about his relationship to disfellowshipping. So Nathan Noor took control of the Watchtower organization in 1942, and as I previously said, it was 1952 that this significant article was released in the pages of the Watchtower. Paragraph 3 has some interesting words about the binary thinking that would soon become synonymous with Jehovah's Witnesses. We might wonder then, since the congregation which God is developing or bringing into existence is based on love, why anyone should ever want to talk about disfellowshipping or putting people out of the congregation. There certainly must be some reason. Well, the reason for disfellowshipping is that some persons get into this congregation of God that do not love Christ. Well, everyone, of course, loves Christ, you say? But that is really a fact. They no longer are imitators of Christ or imitators of the Father, Jehovah God. They no longer walk in the Christ's footsteps. The whole purpose of bringing his servants, his people, into an organization is to keep them clean from the devil's organization. As long as we walk in the way of the devil's crowd, we cannot remain clean. So God has built his own organization. There are two organizations in the world. One is God's, and the other belongs to the devil, who is the god of this system of things. Well, like I said, this is getting pretty culty now. Nathan Noor, like his predecessors before him, wanted to take the organization in a very specific direction. He had a vision of what he thought God wanted, and boy howdy, he was going to see it through to the end. And this is a perfect example of what he was trying to accomplish. This separation from Satan and God's organization. And he was a man all about making the organization look and feel a lot more like it is today. He wanted there to be structure, rules that have to be followed, reports that have to be made. Everything has to come to Watchtower because he saw it as a corporation, wanted to basically run it as a company instead of some goofballs with beards and then no beards who were looking into some numbers and trying to make predictions about the future. He saw it for what it really could be, this global billion-dollar organization, and a lot of that DNA still remains in the organization today. And if you don't believe me about him really wanting to bend the Jehovah's Witnesses into his image or his will, well, one of the biggest criticisms you'll get from other Christians is that they made their own Bible. But this didn't happen until Nathan Noor took over, because that came out in 1960. Well, the first one came out in 1950, and then they released it in two parts. Sorry, my brain gets a little fuzzy. They released it in 1950, and then in 1961, I believe, they released the full rendition of it. So during his presidency, that's when they decided to make their own Bible, because he saw a problem and said, what is the most efficient way to fix this? Well, why don't we just write our own Bible and we can make some changes? That way we don't have to deal with any of these theological questions.
Since the days of C.T. Russell, Jehovah's Witnesses had been using Bible translations accepted in the various lands in which they preached.
The kingdom of heaven is like to a grain of
But there were a number of problems. Antiquated language, the presence of spurious texts, and the fact that most translators had replaced the name of God, Jehovah, with titles such as Lord or God in 1950.
By Jehovah's undeserved kindness, I have the extreme pleasure of releasing to the International Theocracy's Increase Assembly of Jehovah's Witnesses the New World Translation of the Christian Greek Scriptures. But you can't do that, said one of the critics. The committee, in its foreword of 29 pages, shows how it can be done on valid grounds, and it does it.
One of the biggest challenges that One of the biggest challenges Nathan Noor was facing was, how do you take this religious tradition that has been passed on for generations at this point and shift it into something completely different? The classic answer would be use the puppet Bible, where you just make the Bible say whatever you want it to say. But Nathan Noor did something a little bit more insidious, if you will, and calculated and striking. He started to shift the way Jehovah's Witnesses think. Take, for instance, this explanation that goes further in the same article from 1952. We are a free people. We may use our minds the way we want to. We are not coerced or forced or browbeaten into the course of action we take, but we have been made free because of Christ Jesus purchasing us. Do your thinking, but you must still be an imitator of God, for you are free to think along the lines that are based on truth. The wicked world will take you into the grave. The truth will give you life. The line that sticks out to me there the most is, you are free to think along the lines of the truth. That's like going to a restaurant and saying, hey, you are free to get whatever you want, except you can't have chicken, you can't have pork, you can't have potatoes, you can't have spinach, you can't have onions, you can't have bread, you can't have soup. It's okay if you have rice, but you're free to order whatever you want. This is when the Jehovah's Witnesses moved away from being a religion and started becoming a cult. So for decades, Jehovah's Witnesses were always told about the evils of other organizations trying to coerce people, trying to browbeat them, trying to force people to stay in their religion, because if you disagreed with the leadership, you were going to be cut off. And now, a marked shift. No longer are we going to start poking fun and saying how evil they are. We are going to become the very thing that we have been decrying for decades. Now, the excuse or party line given for disfellowshipping is usually about the moral cleanliness of the congregation.
Well, I remember some brothers were saying, oh, that'll never work, and we'll never have enough congregation overseers to do the job. But Brother Noor and the other responsible brothers determined that we were going to maintain Bible standards regardless of the consequences.
Since 1952, Jehovah's Witnesses have adhered to the Bible teaching that those who practice conduct condemned by God should be disfellowshipped.
We want people to be assured that when they become a Jehovah's Witness, there's not a bunch of shenanigans going around. But I believe, in my personal opinion, that Nathan Noor really understood why disfellowshipping would be so useful, and that is so you can control information. In the same article, notice what it says. It is very plain, the true word of God was taught to them by Paul. Now, if anyone comes into the congregation to try to upset adherence to that true word of God and causes stumbling or a division in the congregation, it is necessary to avoid that one. The best way to avoid him is to disfellowship that person, set him aside, get him out of the congregation, so that the whole congregation may remain clean. Yeah, they were talking about apostates, people that had disagreements with the core teachings coming from the organization. And again, they were trying to consolidate the power even more, and in doing so, you have to make people follow the rule book. And that's exactly what they did going forward. As people are reading through this Watchtower, which is going to be a fundamental shift in what it means to be a Jehovah's Witness now, they're seeing these scary little buzzwords like an investigation, disfellowshipping, the company servant, assistant company servant. There are people that will be charged. There is going to be a hearing. And then comes the point when they have no responsibility for their own faith anymore. They do not ask the company to vote on that resolution and say, we approve your action. No, the servants in the company are charged with the responsibility of shepherding the flock and of keeping the congregation clean. So the servants tell the company what action has been taken and that the offensive individual is no longer a member of this congregation. then the congregation should cooperate to the fullest extent with the advice given by those who are looking after their interests, the servants in the organization. Now, Nathan Noor really wanted to make sure that people were scared and afraid and wanted these people that were to be disfellowshipped to be hated by Jehovah's Witnesses. And it's really clear after they talk about the proceedings, but going forward, if someone is a disfellowship person and does wander their way or wants to come back, listen to how they were to be treated by other members of the congregation. If he comes into that meeting and sits down, as long as he is orderly, minds his business, we have nothing to say to him. Those who were acquainted with the situation in the congregation should never say hello or goodbye to him. He is not welcome in our midst. We avoid him. If this one should be sitting in the Watchtower study and raise his hand, the chairman should never recognize him or allow him to make his comment. He is not one of us. He is not a recognized member in God's congregation. Those who are informed and know the individual certainly should avoid him, having nothing to say to him. He has no privileges of service in the congregation whatsoever. He could go over to the book counter and get literature at regular public rates, but the company should never give him books or magazines at company rates, because he is not one of us. What we would do for the public, for those in the devil's organization, we may do for that one. I just can't help but have a little tiny giggle that you no longer get this discount that you used to get on Watchtower propaganda. So take that, Buster. But this whole thing about, well, that person's in the devil's organization, they say it not just once, but again, when talking about if this person hands in their report. He might put his report in the report box, but we tear it up and throw it away. He is not one of us. He is a representative of the devil's organization, trying to corrupt, disturb. He is not clean, and until that individual repents and changes his course of action, he can never come back and be one of the Lord's people. They didn't just kick people out of the congregation. They wanted people to hate those. They call them members of the devil's organization. This is where you are either with us or you are against us. You are a Jehovah's Witness, and if you are not a Jehovah's Witness, you are an agent of Satan trying to corrupt the organization. And this was the perfect setup for getting hyper-fixated on apostates. Down throughout the years, they didn't want people ever even reading something. Why would you read a pamphlet from the devil? Why would you watch a YouTube video from someone in the devil's organization? This is where all of this basically stems from. So they try and do this guise of keeping the congregation clean, but what they're really trying to do is not have their dirty history exposed. Fast forwarding about a decade, we have the July 15th, 1963 Watchtower that talks about what disfellowshipping means. And this really solidifies exactly what disfellowshipping and shunning looks like for Jehovah's Witnesses, because it doesn't only talk about this spiritual fellowship that you'd have, but it also talks about what someone would do if someone's disfellowshipped and interacting with them outside of the congregation and even into their own family. Therefore, the members of the congregation will not associate with the disfellowshipped one, either in the kingdom hall or elsewhere. They will not converse with such one or show him recognition in any way. If the disfellowshipped person attempts to talk to others in the congregation, they should walk away from him. In this way, he will feel the full import of his sins. Otherwise, if all freely communicate with the offender, he would be tempted to feel that his transgression was not such a terrible thing. If it occurs that someone visiting in the congregation or at a larger assembly is not aware that a person has been disfellowshipped and attempts to talk to that one, other brothers observing will tactfully inform him of the situation. Also, the disfellowshipped person who wants to do what is right should inform any approaching him in innocence that he is disfellowshipped and should not be conversing with them. This is what it means to be disfellowshipped as a Jehovah's Witness. You lose everything, and they want you to feel the shame of it. going so far as to say if someone accidentally talks to them because they don't know they're disfellowshipped, that person should report on themselves, or if people are around, they should be like, you're not supposed to be talking to that person. Now, you might think and scratch your head and say, well, that's absurd. No one would do this. It happened all of the time when I was a Jehovah's Witness. You'd come up, hey, Bill, I haven't seen you in a while. Sorry, I'm actually disfellowshipped. They'd put their head down and walk away. Just because I walked up and said hi to someone I hadn't seen in a long time at the grocery store or the mall. It's absolutely humiliating for that person, and they want them to feel it because ultimately, this is exactly what they criticized other churches for doing. This is a weapon that they use to control people. And so serious was this mandate to not talk to a disfellowshipped person that if you were found to be someone that was talking to someone that was disfellowshipped, you too could be disfellowshipped for that. Take a listen. Yes, one's attitude toward a person cut off from the congregation shows his attitude towards Jehovah's righteous principles. When one ignores the disfellowshipping action and continues his association with a disfellowshipped person, then it shows a bad attitude toward Jehovah's laws. He, in effect, is showing that he upholds the offender and thinks Jehovah's righteous laws are of no account. The seriousness of not abiding by the disfellowshipping procedure can be seen when he is called a sharer in the wicked works of the one disfellowshipped. Actually, the one who deliberately does not abide by the congregation's decision puts himself in line to be disfellowshipped for continuing to associate with such a one. Since he is classified the same as the one disfellowshipped, a sharer, then it is reasonable for the same action to be taken against this dissenter. Yes, if you broke the law and made the hiccup of talking to someone who was kicked out of the congregation, you too would be a sharer of that sin. You would have to bear that cross and get kicked out of the congregation just the same. They wanted people to view them as cancerous, something that needs to be cut off and avoided at all costs. The disfellowshipping of a relative does not cancel out natural blood ties. However, it would be well to appreciate that only the contacts absolutely necessary in matters pertaining to family interests should be carried on with one who is disfellowshipped and who lives outside the family circle. In the case of the disfellowshipped relative who does not live in the same home, contact with him is also kept to what is absolutely necessary. As with secular employment, this contact is limited and even curtailed completely, if at all possible. What if a person cut off from God's congregation unexpectedly visits dedicated relatives? What should the Christian do then? If this is the first occurrence of such a visit, the dedicated Christian can, if his conscience permits, carry on family courtesies on that particular occasion. However, if his conscience does not permit this, he is under no obligation to do so. If courtesies are extended, though, the Christian should make it clear that this will not be made a regular practice. If it becomes habitual, it is no different from associating with any other disfellowship person, and it violates the spirit of the disfellowshipping decree. The excommunicated relative should be made to realize that his visits are not now welcome, as they were previously when he was walking correctly with Jehovah. It is vital that dedicated Christians in the congregation, by their actions, make clear to the disfellowshipped relative that his course of conduct is disproved by the family. They must maintain a firm stand for righteous principles. The wrongdoer has to realize that his status is completely changed, and his faithful Christian relatives thoroughly disapprove of his wicked course, and show this disapproval by limiting contact to only those which are unavoidable. A measly 10 years. That's all it took for the Watchtower to move from tolerating people that might disagree with the leadership, maybe even want to appoint their own elders, to the point now where they are telling people to cut off completely their family members unless it's absolutely unavoidable. Like, I guess if you're in a car accident and you have to call the police, you can't avoid having to talk to the police and being in the same room as them. But other than that, treat them as if they are part of the devil's organization. Make them understand that you are no longer part of the family. And this is the policy that has caused so much harm within the Jehovah's Witness religion. The loss of life, the loss of sanity, the loss of time, the heartache, the pain and suffering that generations of people have felt as a result of this policy is absolutely mind-blowing. And only in more recent times are we finally getting governments that are hearing about this and saying, this seems a little bit odd, because you can baptize children, and then children are meant and held up to these rules and standards. So yeah, it doesn't look so. Now, the last of the old guard, Nathan Noor, the last president of the organization that had real authority over the entire organization, that all came to an end around 1975, which, again, like his predecessors before him, was sort of wrapped around this whole controversy involving a prediction about 1975 and the end of the world coming. As all predictions didn't happen, and so there was a restructuring and retooling that officially took place in 1976, whereby there wouldn't be a single president that would be making these decisions, but it would be done by a governing body. And so, thus, the era of the governing body began. Now, that leads us right into the modern era of Watchtower, which I call the JW.org phase. And this is when they really focused on producing videos, and in their doing so, they have made some of the most disturbing cult propaganda this world has ever seen.
Looking back, my parents tried hard to do the right thing, to do things Jehovah's way. But because I didn't have a hatred for what's bad, I couldn't see anything wrong with my choices. This eventually led me to do things I later regretted. I ended up getting disfellowshipped.
Sonia Erickson has been disfellowshipped.
It crushed my whole family.
Okay, to continue the meeting, we may remember last month's service.
Later, my father explained to me that I couldn't remain in the home because I refused to change my lifestyle. He told me I was having a negative effect on my younger brother and sister. Then I'm out of this house. I was determined to do what I wanted. When I left home that day, all I could think about was Eric. I didn't even care that my parents' hearts were breaking. I tried to contact them. I just wanted to talk and to hear their voice. I missed being with my family. And they thought about reaching out to me. But they knew that if they had associated with me, even a little, just to check on me, that small dose of association might have satisfied me.
With the age of the internet and social media and everything being online, Watchtower absolutely picked the perfect time to start showing what goes on behind closed doors when you're a member of the Jehovah's Witnesses. And people started to notice because it was right there in their faces. And as a result of this, people didn't look at ex-Jehovah's Witnesses or apostates as these crazy people waving the Bible around, yelling John 1:1, God is 3 and 3 is God and he is me. But they were just regular, normal people that had some disagreements, and because they had some fundamental theological disagreements with their organization they belonged to, they lost everything. They literally lost their entire lives because of the disagreement, and it's all because of Watchtower. They are the culprits behind it. And now when people could see that, they're starting to take notice. Now, the biggest example of them taking notice is in Norway. Now, I did an entire series of videos, so if you want to check those out, there is, if you go to the playlist tab on the channel, you can find out, I think it's like 7 or 8 videos that I made about all of the court proceedings and how they absolutely ripped Watchtower apart. Now, Watchtower did have a very strange response to this.
Recently, the government of Norway decided that Jehovah's Witnesses would no longer receive certain state benefits that are provided to all registered religions. The authorities in Norway have threatened to remove our legal registration because of our scriptural beliefs and practices regarding disfellowshipping. In the future, various governments will challenge our freedom of worship. They may pressure us to change our scriptural beliefs, but we're certainly not going to do that.
But then the guy that said that was unceremoniously yeeted from the governing body, never to be heard of or spoken about again. So I wonder what possibly this could have to do with anything. Now, jumping forward into the modern era, here we are in 2024, 2023. What adjustments are being made? Well, something I've talked about on the channel before is that they have a lightening of their policy when it comes to speaking to someone that's disfellowshipped when they come to a meeting. No longer do you have to pretend that they have some sort of contractable disease and be like, oh God, no, a disfellowship person. They are able to say, hi, how's the weather? How's your family? How's it going? Okay, well, I can't talk to you for too long, but hopefully we'll see you at the next meeting. You can even text someone inviting them to the meetings that's been disfellowshipped. All of these changes were made. Does this make up for all of the horror that Watchtower did? Absolutely not. But there was a Watchtower that was recently released, and that was the August 2024. Now, it was a little bit strange because they didn't release this in the normal release schedule strategy, and so it led a lot of us to some pretty fun, if I'm completely honest, speculation about what could be contained, what sort of secrets, and it was all just some gobbledygook about them changing the name of what disfellowshipping is. Let's jump into some of this gobbledygook. Gobbledy, schmobbledy, fobbledy, higgledy, piggledy, diggledy, figgledy, liggledy, diggly doo. Hey, I don't know what I'm saying anymore. When an unrepentant wrongdoer is removed from the congregation, an announcement is made to inform the congregation that he is no longer one of Jehovah's Witnesses. We will no longer refer to such ones as being disfellowshipped. In harmony with Paul's words recorded at 1 Corinthians, we will now refer to them as being removed from the congregation. The purpose of that announcement is not to humiliate the wrongdoer. Rather, it is made so that the congregation can follow the scriptural admonition to stop keeping company with that person, not even eating with them. That direction is given for a good reason. The Apostle Paul wrote, "A little leaven ferments the whole batch of dough." Unrepentant wrongdoers can weaken the determination of those who are trying to live by Jehovah's righteous standards. How then should we view a fellow believer who is removed from the congregation? Although we do not socialize with him, we should view him as a lost sheep, not a lost cause. A sheep that has strayed from the fold may well return. Remember that lost sheep dedicated himself to Jehovah. Sadly, he is not living up to that dedication at present, and that puts him in a dangerous position. Clearly, a tonal shift has happened within the Watchtower organization, where before they looked at people and said, you are part of the devil's organization. You are not one of us, and you are to be avoided at all costs, unless it's absolutely necessary. Now, they're softening this. They're trying to make it seem like, well, we still have our love for this person and we want them to return. They just made a few bad mistakes. And because of this narrative shift, where before it could take someone years of dealing with this humiliation of being disfellowshipped, now they might be able to come back within a few months. Is the individual who has been removed from the congregation abandoned, left completely on his own to find his way back to Jehovah? By no means. When informing an unrepentant wrongdoer that he will be removed from the congregation, the committee of elders will explain to him what steps he can take to return to the congregation. But the elders will do even more. In most cases, they will tell the wrongdoer that they would like to meet with him again after a few months have passed to see if he has had a change of heart. So they basically want to wait a couple months, let it settle in, have the person say I'm sorry, and get invited right back into the congregation. Again, it's just making it a little less severe, but it doesn't make up for all of the pain and suffering that the Jehovah's Witnesses have caused over the years. And then they have this paragraph: does what we have considered mean that we would completely ignore a person who has been removed from the congregation? Not necessarily. Certainly we would not socialize with them, but Christians can use their Bible-trained conscience in deciding whether to invite a person who was removed from the congregation, perhaps a relative or someone they were close to previously, to attend a congregation meeting. What if he attends? In the past, we would not greet a person. Here again, each Christian needs to use Bible-trained conscience in this matter. Some may feel comfortable with greeting or welcoming the person to the meeting. However, we should not have an extended conversation or socialize with the individual. Now, it is my opinion that the reason this whole thing even existed in the first place was, I don't know why my voice just cracked there, was they wanted to protect people from the dirty laundry that Watchtower has, the skeletons in the closet, and the people exposing them are known as apostates. So, does Watchtower make sure that they keep the most important aspects of this rule in place? Well, you already know the answer. Some may wonder, doesn't the Bible say that a Christian who says a greeting to such a person becomes a sharer in his wicked works? The context of this scripture shows that this direction refers to apostates and others who actively promote wrong conduct. Therefore, if a person is actively promoting apostate teachings or other wrongdoing, the elders would not arrange to visit him. Of course, there is hope he will come to his senses. Until that happens, though, we would neither greet such a person nor invite him to attend a congregation meeting. So, the real reason for this whole thing to exist in the first place stays perfectly intact, and yet, on the surface, they're able to try and make an attempt to dodge some of the criticism that they are facing, not only with news and media, but also within governments. As far as it goes with governments, that's just not going to work. But anyway, I cover all of that in my Norway video series, which you should definitely check out. Watchtower, in their latest move to try and say, well, we don't even have a disfellowshipping practice. We don't disfellowship people. That's crazy. Well, now they're just trying to change around their words and running around with semantics, hoping to confuse people. But those with a sharp mind won't be confused by these things. They can talk all day and think that they're philosophic or changing anything. Like people sit around like, is water wet? Is hair hairy? What smells worse, poop or crap? At the end of the day, we're all talking about the exact same thing. It doesn't matter. You're tossing a word salad around that no one wants to eat. So that ends my brief history of the Jehovah's Witnesses, excommunication, shunning, and disfellowshipping. I sure hope you enjoyed it. If you're still around, don't forget to drop a like on this video. It's very much appreciated. It helps the video get out to more people on YouTube, and consider subscribing to the channel, as there's lots of content like this. With all that being said, stay safe, be kind, and show yourself the same kindness that you showed others. And I hope you have a good-ass day.